Hi, I won't bore you with an intro, you saw the title or the thumbnail, you know why you're here. I'm Unijoy and this is an aesthetic analysis of Deltarune. There are spoilers for the new chapters. So to start off with the macro, the big picture, the overall art style of Deltarune. Beginning here seems like the natural place to start since the art style is the most important aspect of a game's aesthetic decisions. It lays the foundation for everything else to be built upon it, and it spearheads the direction with every other artistic decision flowing from it. Deltarune does not look like your typical game. You could easily pass Deltarune off as being 10, maybe 20, 30 years older than its actual age, but this is standard for a Toby Fox project, as Undertale shares the same retro stylization, but to a more refined degree. There's overall a lot more detail in Deltarune, as well as a lot more care taken with composition, colours and character design. But even with all these advancements, it still holds true to its SNES roots. I'll speak a bit more on its inspiration since it can help us better understand why Toby Fox has chosen to stick with this art style. Just as it's near impossible to talk about Deltarune without talking about Undertale, it's almost impossible to not bring up Earthbound whilst discussing a Toby Fox project. His first notable work being the 2008 Earthbound Halloween ROM hack, Homestuck containing Earthbound-inspired game segments, and a bunch of references to the game as being scattered around the place. Deltarune's art style draws very heavily from Earthbound, retaining the pixel artwork older consoles were able to run. Not only is this pixel artwork functionally efficient, taking up a lot less space and being graphically less demanding to run, on top of it being much easier to produce. Not saying that pixel art is easy by any means, I encourage you to download Asprite and try your hand at creating. It's a lot more difficult than you'd expect. I'm just saying it's easier to draw with 2D pixels than it would be to make the lands in between from Elden Ring. But with every artistic decision, functionality is rarely the driving factor, and in this case we can see Deltarune's pixel art as a way of calling back to the older ages of gaming. Since we have this mental connection between pixel art and old games, for many of us we have the mental connection of old games and an early life. A time when things were simpler, no interpersonal drama, no taxes, a time when you could sit down on your DS and play Pokemon for an entire day straight and not feel like you're wasting your life. By keeping the style of old games, engaging with Deltarune can pull us into that mindset of nostalgia and reminiscing without needing to do much else. And I guess this is less of a broad statement to make, but I think that pixel art could be an homage to Toby Fox's younger self. This was Toby Fox's dream game, like literally a dream game. It came to him during a fever dream that he wasn't medicated for, and so holding on to the retro stylization can be seen as holding true to that dream. You make the game you dreamed about as a child would have imagined it. But most of all, pixel art is timeless. The modern graphics of today, no matter how good we see them as, will be dated in 10 years. Just as upon release in 2004, Half-Life 2 was praised for how good it looks. Comparing that to Red Dead Redemption 2 or Death Stranding, check out the Hairiest Hair's phenomenal video on that by the way, Half-Life 2 looks unbelievably janky. Since Deltarune has been properly stylized, it won't face this issue of looking worse with time, making it infinitely replayable. It can exist as a staple rather than a flash-in-the-pan game. And the final way in which pixel art aids Deltarune is through minimalism. While taking a break from writing this script, I watched Why Do Games Still Use Pixel Art by Riptide Dev, and he used an analogy I really liked. When you're reading a book, you can't see what the characters look like. You only get snippets of information that let you craft the image in your own mind. In a similar way, by using a low-detailed pixel style, you only get slight indications of what a character would look like. You get shapes and colours the same amount you'd get from reading a description, so it's up to you to fill in the blanks, to let your mind run free with possibilities, like what does Chris's face look like? What type of fabric is Rousey's cloak made of? Is Lancer wearing clothes, or does he just look like that? In this way, the game can feel a lot more personal, since half of the character and world designs are up to you. It gives the player the ability to use their imagination to immerse themselves in this world, by making it partly their own, instead of just spoon-feeding information. Can you imagine how boring it would be to see hyper-realistic Lancer in Chapter 1, and you learn that he does just look like that and is in fact naked? This strips, pun intended, away the magic of imbuing your own headcanons into the surrounding design. And that leads us on nicely to the next topic, character designs. I wanted to move on to color next and slowly work our way down from the macro to the micro, but I won't give up a nice segue. There's a lot of characters in Deltarune and I don't have the time nor willpower to talk about them, so I'm going to talk about some broader ways Deltarune utilizes character design and then discuss a bit about the main three. So there's a principle in character design that you've probably heard a million times over. If you want a character to have a good and memorable design, you should be able to recognize them from their silhouette. If you look on screen, I've made a little game so you can get what I'm saying. Just at a glance, not able to see any detail, you know who these characters are. Well, granted, you know the media they come from. From left to right, we have Sans from Undertale, Bill Cipher from Gravity Falls, Homestuck's Nepeta, and lastly, you guessed it, it's Lancer. A good character can be recognized by their silhouette, but a great character silhouette will provide you with information about said character just from shape alone. The example I always like to use for this is Team Fortress 2. Just from this lineup, you can get a decent chunk of information about each character and their role just from their outline. For example, the big guy with the minigun is probably going to be your tank role. The guy with the lab coat is probably a scientist or a medic of some kind. The guy with a hard hat and wrench probably creates traps. And the guy with the gas mask and flamethrower probably has some screws loose. I believe that Deltarune, for the most part, fits into this upper echelon of character design. Looking at our main three, we can clearly identify Susie as the tank class, being larger and visually stronger than the other two. Ralsei is the mage or support class from his long flowing robes. And Chris, in all honesty, isn't that identifiable by themselves. But I think the lack of telling traits tells us more than you'd think, especially when they're brought into relation with the other two. The Paladin or Knight class is often far less distinguishable from their contemporaries. Take Aragorn from Lord of the Rings, for example. What makes his design memorable when he's lined up with hobbits, elves, dwarves, and wizards? There really isn't that much, since the Knight is, maybe a controversial take, a little boring. The interest of their character usually comes internally rather than externally, so the blinded design fits better. And Chris is no exception to this. I feel like it would be superfluous to explain how Chris's internal struggles is one of the more intriguing aspects of the game. So without knowing anything about these characters, just by looking at them, you're visually transferred a whole bunch of knowledge about their roles. That is the hallmark of great character design. Taking a closer look at Chris, since they are the main character after all, Toby Fox does a lot of cool tricks to convey personality through their character design. The faceless depiction we see of Chris leans into the lack of identity they have, just being a vessel for the player to enact their will on the world. And I'd also like to point out the use of semiotics within Chris's standard design. Brief rundown of semiotics: it's the study of signs and symbols and their use or interpretation. So if you walked into a bar and saw a picture of a cigarette in a red circle with a line through it, though there's nothing explicitly telling you no smoking in this bar, since our culture has designated the form of a red circle with a line through it as a signifier for no, and the picture of a cigarette is a signifier for, well, a cigarette, you can interpret the sign to say no smoking, even though nobody has actually told you no smoking. Society has designated meanings to these shapes, and that meanings can be decoded through your cultural understanding. This isn't limited to signs only. We use this for logos, colours, and more relevantly, character design. To give another example, in David Lynch and Mike Frost's Twin Peaks, there's a character called Laura Palmer. We rarely ever get to see her interact with the other characters since she's killed before the show even starts. But Lynch uses semiotics to convey parts of her character without needing to do flashback upon flashback, by instead pulling on our culturally defined meanings, such as making her a blonde and pulling on notations of old Hollywood and the white picket fence family. And in a similar fashion, Chris wears the same jumper that Chara does in Undertale. Toby Fox uses your pre-built knowledge of his own creations, since it's so seared into people's minds, and then uses that to create a sense of unease in the player surrounding Chris's role. It's very impressive how green with a yellow stripe can convey distrust, skepticism, and caution, just because of how familiar Deltarune fans are with the rest of Toby Fox's body of work. Susie and Ralsei mirror each other in their designs. Susie being very jagged and bold, whereas Ralsei is more soft and reserved, unsurprisingly matching their personalities at the beginning of the game. It's small bits of visual storytelling that really add to the whole experience, and it also plays on the idea of no one chooses who they are in this world. Would Ralsei be less timid if physically they showed more dominance? I think it's pretty neat. They're also directly opposite each other on the colour wheel, Ralsei being primarily green and Susie being a more pinkish purple. And talking of colour, it also plays a vital role in the art direction and level design of Deltarune. Take a look at Hometown. It utilises a more muted or pastel colour scheme. Not only does this look very nice, but it also makes Hometown feel, well, more like a home. By softening the colour palette, it takes off the edge that you'd get from a more vibrant shade. This can make a colour feel more comforting, relaxing, and inviting. I mean, imagine if the trees were neon orange instead of the soft autumn tone that we see in the game. The neon would be too harsh for our brains to register the area as home-like. To speak more on the trees, having Homestuck stuck in this infinite autumn adds to the cozy atmosphere. Autumn is when the weather gets a bit too cold to stay outside, when it starts getting dark earlier, a time when you need to wrap up and stay indoors, but less depressing than what winter brings. It reminds me of Majula or Anor Londo from Dark Souls 2 and 1, respectively. Probably could have ordered them better, right? Wrong! I wrote it in, then realized it was in the wrong order, then wrote the joke about realizing it instead of changing it. It's all a show. There's a camera there, there's a camera there, there's a camera there. While canonically, it's probably because the chapters of Deltarune take place a couple of days apart, but with the extremely long waits between releases on our end, it feels like the place is trapped in time. It's something I realized a lot now that I'm between my home and uni multiple times a year. Things change without you, things change really fast, but having the hometown stuck makes it feel welcoming. Now contrast that with the Dark World. These are often much more vibrant and thriving compared to the hometown. This can be for a couple of reasons. The harsher colouring indicates that this place will be unsurprisingly harsher. The energy that colour communicates to the player also indicates that adventure is waiting for them, and it helps it stand out against a black background. Something that's more of a theory than fact is the colours of Chris and Susie, Noelle, and a fourth unknown person fit into the CYMK colour model used for printing. Cyan, yellow, magenta, and key, or black. Black could possibly be the Roaring Knight, or it could just be CYM, which is a different colour model. The printing works, and I quote from Wikipedia because I'm not a printing expert, by partially or entirely masking colours on a lighter, usually white, background. The ink reduces the light that would otherwise be reflected. Such a model is called subtractive, as ink subtracts some colours from the white light. I'm not a theorist, so I don't have the mental power to link this to something. Maybe it's alluding to the ending of the Dark World whilst those three characters are in it. Also, whilst researching this further, I found some other guy realised it 3 years earlier than me and then went deeper than I did, making their theory look so much better. So thanks for that Reddit user Luca Gamers, you're making me look like a fraud. They point out that Chris, Susie and Ralsei could represent RGB, red, green and blue. This is what our monitors and screen use to display colour. They note that this is a digitalized colour or fake colour, and when mixed together produces white. However, when we mix the CMY colours, they produce black. And if you want a really crackpot theory that I came up with, people who've come into contact with the main man WD Gaster have pink and yellow eyes. Spamton and Friend, for example, mixing yellow and pink gives you orange, and if you invert the colours of the Undertale souls, each colour links up except for blue and orange, blue being Chris, our protagonist of Deltarune, and orange representing Gaster, the person who's possibly pulling the strings on both games. I don't know where you'd go with this because I'm not MatPat, but maybe I'm onto something, or more likely on something. Anyways, that's pretty much I have all to say for today. I'd love to go into this topic a bit deeper later on. I would have here, however, I'm kinda chained to the algorithm to make a Deltarune video as soon as possible, otherwise people just move on. Saying that, this video is probably out too late already. I hope you've enjoyed. I've been Unijoy, and you have been entertained.